Well, hello there,
Hello.
friends, lovers. Thank you for joining us. Today is March 28, 2021. This is 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir. And I am here. I'm Robert Nasir, and I'm here with my co-host, Amy Nasir.
Amy Nasir.
And we are not alone. No, we are not.
We are not alone.
We are not alone. You are not alone. Oh. Excuse me, my brain just went in a few directions there that I'm not going to share with you. Today is Sunday, March 28th, 2021, the 87th day of 2021. Just 278 days left in this year for you to make 2021 your best year yet. We're going to help you with that. You've just got 272 shopping days until Christmas and just 7 days until Easter. We already found out last week what your favorite Easter candy was. I have to admit, the ones I talked about aren't what I've been eating this week. I picked up the chocolate-covered marshmallows, and that has been my downfall. I've only lost 2 pounds in March, which, you know, folks have been following along my aspirations for the year. I ain't going to get there at this rate, but we're going to bump it up this week. This day in history. This day in history. We always talk about this day in history. We're going to do this day in history, the 3 Mile Island disaster.
Goodness.
The first American killed in World War I. The Duke lacrosse team was suspended following sexual assault allegations. There's just nothing good this day in history.
Bummer.
I know. This day in
Sorry.
history, British summertime begins.
Oh,
See, Britain does their version of daylight saving time.
do they have summer in Britain?
Well, apparently summertime begins in the spring.
Very good.
Summertime came in the spring. So British summertime begins, and that means, and here's the only reason you care about that is, that means our clubhouse show now just went from 8 o'clock to 7 o'clock. Because
Wow.
we're based on British time. Our show is actually at midnight UK time.
You mean our clubhouse show that is on Wednesdays at 7 p.m.
Our
now?
clubhouse show that is on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. Okay.
The one that is called Life on Earth?
Why on earth are we off to such a rough start? And the answer is because we don't care about any of the usual stuff.
Right. No. Yeah. Wait. Tell me, how many days until Halloween?
I don't know how many days until Halloween. Don't care how many days until Halloween. And the reason is we are joined this week by Sean Albert.
Sean?
We are
Albert.
interviewing Sean Albert this week. Sean Albert, expert teacher, extraordinary teacher at the
my
Henry
goodness.
Ford Academy in Dearborn, Michigan. Why do you care? Well, Sean's going to tell you why you should care, but I'm going to tell you first. We have a large philosophical audience, culture war interested audience, a largely objectivist audience. People sometimes get the idea that, do they really have great teachers anymore? Are the Marva Collins out there anymore? We have Montessori schools, but that's kind of bringing in a legacy from the past. Are there really great teachers out there right now in public or even charter schools? And I'm here to tell you the answer is yes. Sean Albert, welcome to 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir. I can't tell you how glad we are to have you here.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
So Sean, if you want to introduce yourselves, I told everybody a little bit that you are a teacher at the Henry Ford Academy. What is the Henry Ford Academy?
So the Henry Ford Academy is a charter school, as you mentioned, in Dearborn, Michigan. I'm a history and just broadly social studies teacher. I teach history and civics. And though definitely it's a more casual environment here, I would like to begin with just a little bit of one point for the sake of professionalism and just say that the opinions and ideas expressed by myself here are my own.
Very good.
But it
Are
is...
they your own and not anybody else's?
They're not
Indeed,
second-hand.
they are entirely first-handed.
Outstanding.
So as far as, I primarily teach ninth graders, which means 14-year-olds beginning of high school, and I try to integrate a lot of elements of philosophy, particularly epistemology and ethics, and
Epistemology
not so
and
much-
ethics. What?
Let me see if I've got that right. Ninth
Wait.
graders, 14-year-olds, which some of my friends assume right now don't know how to think and can't be taught.
They can't do math.
You said ninth graders, and you said the words epistemology. I'm sorry.
and
Don't
then-
let me interrupt you. You go ahead.
And then you said ethics.
Ethics, yeah.
What?
so
Okay.
epistemology, just to clarify for everybody, is the subject, or is the field of philosophy that deals with man's knowledge, concept formation, logic, reason, basically, how do you know what you know? And in education, across all of life, this is relevant. Any fact that you know, anything that you think, any approach you have, it's important to be able to know, how'd you come to that conclusion? How'd you process this information? All of that's involved. And in education, this is often implicit in the whole process of learning. And what I wanted to do was to make it explicit. Now, I begin all of my classes, both civics and U.S. history, with a lesson called Basic Knowledge About Knowledge. And it gives the students a kind of baseline of sort of what epistemology is and some terms, some tools to process what they're learning.
You're giving ninth graders
specifically.
You're giving 14-year-olds this information.
Yes, indeed.
That is outstanding.
I remember the first time you talked about this to us, some time ago now, and it was a jaw dropper then, and it's still a bit of a jaw dropper now. And I know better. I know kids aren't all terrible and unintelligent, but it's still the idea of, well, we're going to start off with a lesson in knowing what you know. We're going to talk about epistemology.
And I'll tell you what. Okay, so you mentioned Henry Ford Academy.
Henry Ford Academy.
That is on the campus of the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village. That happens to be where I work.
A school in a museum, and it's the same museum Amy works in.
And just to give the audience a little tiny background, the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village, or the Henry Ford, however you want to call it, used to be called the Edison Institute, and it was a school. It was a school in which children went about and were taught, and Henry Ford was there, and basically he taught children, maybe he didn't, but somebody taught them how to chop wood, how to be hands-on, how to farm, and they taught them, Thomas Edison, they have Menlo Park there. They taught them science in the Menlo Park building complex. Just outstanding, mind-blowing things. So you would think, where's the best place to teach a child is here on the campus of the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village. So back in, I think it was the 70s, around the 70s, this particular iteration of the school ended, and the 1997, I believe, Henry Ford Academy was born, and it is a public charter school, and you can enroll now. As a matter of fact, enrollment is happening right now.
Yeah, a link to that is in the show notes. I noticed on the webpage it's free. It's public school. It's paid by somebody, but if you're eligible to go to a public school, you're eligible to go to the Henry Ford Academy.
Yes, and it is really a wonderful place. And honestly, one other thing is I have seen some of the graduates of HFA, Henry Ford Academy, and they're really outstanding. They're really, really outstanding kids.
Well, if Sean is teaching them epistemology, you've got to be pretty sharp.
Yes,
so, Sean, we didn't mean to interrupt you there. You were telling us now, you're starting off early in the year with a lesson on learning, on knowledge.
Yeah, it's one of the things, I think some good context to throw in here with that sort of backstory of the school itself is the name of what previously known as the Edison Institute, then the Henry Ford Museum, and then the Henry Ford Museum for Innovation. And it's, or I believe that's the subscript to that. But the main focus, one of the huge things that runs across the entire institution is innovation. And part of the purpose behind the school was to find new innovative ways to approach teaching. And so this is mine. And each person, each teacher there brings their own flavor of that, because we're given a lot of freedom to create innovative solutions to problems relating to teaching. And
that's fascinating to me, because I remember a few years ago when they changed the name of the museum from the Henry Ford Museum to the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation. It would not have occurred to me they were applying that to what you're doing as well, to the Academy. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Well, that's been the kind of, I think that they changed it because a lot of people thought that being it was the Henry Ford Museum, that it was just a car museum. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, it's filled with tons of stuff, which works great for me as a history teacher, that covers all sorts of topics. And, in the school, within the museum, one of the things that's there is a display of American politics, with liberty and justice for all,
Yes.
emphasizing this broad view of innovation. It's about not just making a gadget, but it's about ideas.
Yes,
Oh,
so
yeah.
social and political
They
innovation.
cover the founding fathers and
Oh, it's
Abraham
amazing,
Lincoln,
guys.
and they've got the Rosa Parks bus there, and
I'm telling you all, yeah, you need to go, and you need to have me and Sean as your tour guides.
now, Sean, do you then bring your students out of the classroom and do activities in the museum?
All the time.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
in fact, sometimes if we're talking about something that wasn't intended as a trip to the museum, but something comes up, I will sometimes just say, all right, everybody put your pencils down, get up, we're going outside. And we'll go into the museum. I remember the very first time I ever did that, we were talking about the Industrial Revolution as a sort of aside to a discussion in class about the Enlightenment and the steam engines and how that played a role in that. And none of them knew what I was talking about. So I was like, all right, everybody put your pencils down. We walked 50 feet from my door, and there's the oldest surviving steam engine in the world. And we looked at that and talked about that and how its role in the Industrial Revolution. So we do all sorts of stuff like that. And the purpose of my lesson on epistemology at the beginning is that they're going to be presented with a lot of concrete, just being able to see perceptually these items throughout history. And they're also going to learn a lot of things that are also of a more abstract nature to them as well. Concepts like liberty, justice, equality, when reading things like the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution.
Yes.
And the purpose behind that initial lesson is to ground everyone's thinking in terms of, here's how thinking happens. Here's the whole process behind that. Or at the very least, here's a basic understanding that you can use to talk about what's going on. And this is really important because students at HFA come from all across Wayne County. So no, you can't assume a context of knowledge, especially for ninth graders who are coming here from all different middle schools. And so the purpose behind the lesson was to have that common language that we could use to talk about what sort of the thinking that they're doing. And also for those students that are, struggling to maybe keep up with, or would otherwise be struggling to keep up with some of the content. This is something that takes all that implicit stuff that wasn't making sense before and gives it to them straight. Here's what's going on, and here's the sort of way you can use your mind as your own little superpower to understand this. And for the students that get it and they're bored because school is a thing that they've mastered long ago, this takes that implicit stuff that they've been doing but never figured that there was a name for it or even thought about it, and makes it clear, allowing them to take new steps in the development of their thinking. And so what I go through with the students is in this lecture discussion, because all my lectures I'll talk and then I'll hand it to the students and we'll have a conversation, so that it's not just that they're passively listening, they're hearing some information and then they're going to chew on it for a bit. And we begin with abstractions and concretes. We talk about conceptualization and perception. We talk about...
What?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. 14-year-old. So conceptualization, abstraction. You talk about what concretes versus abstractions, or... Yeah.
Well, yeah, we go through kind of like what, when I talk about, because I've used these terms in class, give me a more concrete example. Right. What do you mean?
Perfect.
And so I put that lesson together to purposely give them those tools. Because a lot of, the thing is that most teenagers, and what I found from both working this job and working as a substitute teacher before I worked that job, and working, doing my student teaching before that, I've taught a lot of different ninth graders. And I myself, obviously, as we all have, I've been 14 at some point. And I think that people chronically underestimate what 14-year-olds are capable of, or already are doing. And the thing is that most of them are engaged they engage with questions of what exists out there, of how do I know what I know, of what should I do in my life, what is it, I want to be a good person, what does that mean? Or they've engaged in topics like politics or art, and they'll talk about these things. They don't, though, entirely understand how to approach all the subjects and to make explicit their thinking.
Right.
And that's the point of the lesson, is that it's not trying to introduce something that's completely alien to them. It's giving a name to a thing that they've been doing for years.
Right.
It's you mentioned something that went real quick, and I'm sure to you're just used to it, but I think a lot of people, if they missed it, it's worth repeating. You said there's kind of two categories. You've got kids, they've learned a lot, but it's a jumble and they don't know what to do with all that information, and you can help them organize it. And then you've got other kids who, were pretty well integrated, and you can take them even further. And you left out the kids who come to you and have no idea what they're talking about, and you've got to start from scratch. And apparently that's just not an issue. That all these kids know something, and they're coming in with something. And again, I don't want to overplay the degree of cynicism out there, but there are even I would fall for this idea that if I came across a really sterling teacher, he'd kind of have to start me from scratch because all my other teachers are so terrible. And no, it sounds like the kids are coming in, and some of them are better informed than others, but all of them are coming in with something, and you're able to work with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had kids that couldn't tell you, couldn't identify states on a map, but they could tell you a lot about, maybe they're really interested in cars, and they have a depth of knowledge on this subject.
Right.
And as long as they've thought about something, as long as they've got some passion about something, as long as there's something there, and even the students who at first are, that angsty 14-year-old sort of throwing apathy at everybody, even those kids, all of them have experienced these things. And the point of education is not to say, you know nothing, now let me fill your brain up with this knowledge. It's also not to say, run around and do whatever. It's organized, it's structured, it's systematic, but it's taking, all learning, on some level, you're adding and you're integrating together new information with the things you already know. And part of the point of one of the things I designed in the class is that there's nothing about this that's meant to be just purely off in this own category, and it's just a bit of trivia that you can just throw at people to sound really smart later on in life. It's all there to integrate into your life. To, even if some fact doesn't immediately pertain to something you're trying to achieve at this moment, it will. It's something that will pertain to the things you're trying to do.
So you're let me interrupt you here. So you're basically saying, I mean, on a philosophical perspective, that you're implying, and everything that you're saying and everything that you're presenting is this philosophical perspective that you have this ability to reason, to grasp what's out there, to integrate this information, to conceptualize it, and that the entire world is open to them to understand.
Absolutely.
So it's, yeah.
One of the fundamentals, before you can even explain any of these things, before you can talk about anything, is when you're working with the students, you need to get across to them exactly that kind of, and really establish that you mean it. That, they can achieve great things in their lives. They can achieve values in their lives. And that an essential element of that is that they can think for themselves. They can know the world around them. They can have confidence in the things that they learn and the things that they know. And that's part of the reason why I go into the epistemology stuff, is that here's the grounding for every idea that you have. And I don't have to tell them exactly how they came to every single idea. I can hand that to them, and as they encounter challenges to the things that they think, they'll have the ability to trace back their steps, to think through these things for themselves and know how they've come to know all of these things. And to be able to have a conversation, to be able to have a discussion, or to be able to learn something, one of the things that is important is that students can feel comfortable in that, not necessarily in the way that you have to not feel discomfort when when ideals are challenged, but that you have to feel that not everything you think is under attack.
Right.
And you need to have the confidence that, part of one of the things I talk about in that epistemology lecture is that perception is unerring. You saw what you saw, you heard what you heard. But when you try to integrate that into a concept, there's potential for error. And that if you find that you've made an error, if you find that you've come to a conclusion that is in contradiction with other things you see around you, it's not that you throw out all of your thinking. It's not that everything you've worked on up to that point is, to be thrown away. It is go back through it,
Yeah.
figure out what the mistake was, and correct it.
You sound like me in last episode. but
So what does that look like in the classroom?
yeah, before we get into that, we do have a question.
Yes.
Stana, I don't know if you remember Stana, or met her, but she's a lovely person, and on YouTube she's asking, is there a video of this initial epistemological class available on YouTube?
At the moment, it is not. It is an unlisted video, but it is something that
Oh, you did
maybe in the
actually
future.
record one?
What was it?
You did actually record one?
I did actually record one.
Oh.
Wow.
Well, I recorded a just kind of scripted one that I went through for online learning, so I could give it to the students so they could reference it later.
Ah, of course.
Perfect. And one other thing I just want to say, Jennifer, Caton, and Mary Aline all say hello to you.
Well, hello.
This is, of course, not only is this an episode of 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir, it's a Great Lakes Objectivists reunion.
Yes.
Yes. Hello to all the GLOW people out there.
Yes, indeed.
So how do you get clarity with a 14-year-old on how do you know a chair is really a chair?
So this is one of the things that I mentioned earlier, that this isn't a pure lecture and that I'm not standing up at the lectern with a script.
Okay.
I go through at every stage and I concretize everything I'm talking about. And oftentimes I'll involve the students in a discussion that's meant to bring the point across, not by just me explaining it, but by me putting them through the process. And one of them, kind of as you alluded to there, is I ask the students, I'll pull up a chair in class and I'll say, why is this a chair? And they'll initially go, and I'll look very serious, very, no laughing matter. And they'll give me this look after a little bit and go, Mr. Albert, what do you mean? Of course it's a chair. This is a silly question. I said, well, what makes it a chair? Well, you sit on it. And I'll jump up on one of the tables behind me, sit down on it and go, chair. And they'll go, no, that's a table. I'll go, well, what makes a table a table? Well, you put stuff on it. I'll grab a book and I'll throw it on the chair and I'll go, table. And we start there to demonstrate to them in practice the process by which they know, and I always make it a point, you know these things. You're not wrong to think them, but you have to tell me and explain explicitly why.
Right.
Unless you can make it explicit, you don't really know it. And we do that all throughout the class.
That's excellent.
We talk about I mentioned I teach civics. One of the things that this builds up to is that in civics, we start with basic fundamentals of politics and government and civics and all that. Things like the purpose of government. What is the purpose of government? What's its primary function? We talk about the types of governments that exist. We talk about, and the next unit's all about the creation of the United States government. And then the last one's about going through the Constitution line by line. And throughout that, the students work on a project. So not only are they learning this information, they have a 3-part project where they have to, there's an argumentative essay where they have to argue what is the true purpose of government. And they build off of, 4 different philosophers, Aristotle, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And they have to argue one of those points. And then in the second component, they have to say, well, how does that purpose, what is the best type of government to put that purpose into practice? What is the one that's going to achieve that? Or is going to be most likely to achieve that based off of its structure?
So by the time you're done with these 9th graders, they've heard of Aristotle, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau?
Yes. And I've got a story for that I can save for later.
Okay.
And then the last part is the project as a whole is called the My Constitution Project. And they create a constitution while we're reading through the American Constitution, putting the principles that they've previously argued into practice. And they can compare and contrast theirs to the U.S. Constitution to see, we talked about the principles underlying the founding of the United States, the founding fathers, and how they put them into practice in the Constitution. And they're going to take their ideas that they've been arguing for and put them into practice in their own project. And so there's always a tie between, here's some information that you may not have known before, and then here's an activity to put it into practice, which is, I mean, it's the fundamental of what teaching is, but it's again, principles and actions are it's easy to get those, I think, skewed in the mix. And I've worked hard to try to make sure that especially every huge abstract idea has a payoff in, putting it into practice and really making sure that the students know for themselves that, yes, I figured this out. And not just, well, I heard him say it, so I think I get it.
Right. Yeah, remember when we were in school, the big modality was have them write it down, because when they put their hand in motion, they write it down, they'll remember it better. Well, I think coming up with an activity where you actually have to use some creativity and some thinking would allow you to retain that information much better.
With the one of the things we start with before we even get into my Constitution, before we get into the civics content, is after we do the basic knowledge about knowledge.
Right.
One of the things we do to put it into practice is there's two smaller activities I have them do. One of them is called Last Year in 2 Minutes, and the other one is called Values, the Values activity.
Mm-hmm.
And the first of the two is, I mentioned earlier that there are sort of two main branches of philosophy that are considered as part of, or that need to be considered as part of creating a philosophy of education, and that is epistemology and ethics. And I explained a bit of the epistemology, but the ethics, the value side of it, I hadn't touched on yet. And this is where it comes into play, is in one trimester course on civics or on US history, there's no way to cover the totality of the subject, even everything that they ought to know. And so when you go through and you have to dwindle down to the most essential information, well, the question being, well, what's essential? And the thing is that that's always going to be value laden. That's always going to be, there's no value neutral position on that. And there's going to be, you have to make evaluations. And so I emphasize that to the students, to both let them in as commentary on how teaching works, to see the process I'm doing, but also to get them in the process of thinking about it from their own perspective, is I have them try to tell me the story of what they did last year in 2 minutes, which forces them to try to essentialize their story. And when we do that, I then emphasize, well, what are the things you focused on? And then they come from that and they go, okay, well, it's friends, family, achieve major achievements, and we get into those things. And I emphasize to them, those are your values. Those are the things you personally consider to be important. And then we go through and talk about, well, what are the values in your life, and create a value hierarchy so that they have a clear eye on the prize, from the small stuff to the big stuff. And those things set up both, it's a sort of meta commentary on the class as a whole and how a survey course works. And then also, giving them a sense of, here are the things I'm doing this for. Because it can be hard as you go through and teach subjects about, you mentioned, I was mentioning earlier Locke and Hobbes and Aristotle and Rousseau, and it can be really easy, especially as someone who's passionate about the subject, to dive into the content and kind of lose track of the audience I'm speaking to. And for them to also go, okay, Mr. Albert, but how does this apply to my life? Mm-hmm. And, there's two ways you can get that across. Talk about something that's very topical, or if you're going to try and explain something that's abstract and is universal or timeless, well, you need to make it clear to them how those things that are broad abstractions, these big ideas, play a direct role in their lives. Otherwise, you could talk them till you're blue in the face and it won't get across.
Well, that's extraordinary, just the idea that you can apply a hierarchy of values to your own life. If they can just walk out of a classroom with that, they're ahead of a lot of people. We talked about that on the show before, and it's one of the messages of Andrew Bernstein's lecture, How to Be an Impassioned Valuer.
Right.
Is to take time to figure out what your values are.
Well,
and in the world of life coaching, that's one of the lessons is, if you want to know what your own values are, look at what you've actually been doing. So I love that idea of a 2-minute version of your prior year. That's great.
And that gives you that gives these 14-year-olds a sense of continuity in their life. And I think I'm sure it will help them understand what's coming after high school. That's something that, I remember in high school, that's something I never had. After high school meant, for all I knew, it could have been death. It could have just been a black void. I had no real instruction or no real guidance as to, first of all, somebody actively asking me what my values are, somebody actively encouraging me to introspect on my values, and somebody giving me a perspective that these are tools that you can use now outside of high school as your life continues on. That's, it's so empowering, Sean. It's all I have to say. And I just want to say, Emily is chiming in. She said she went to St. John's College, where they discussed ideas like this, especially in science. All classes are seminar style to have these conversations. Then she says, however, there's no stress on values, ethics, or deferring to reality. And she also mentioned this is amazing work. So there you are.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, a lot of these words that you're saying hopefully are going to reach a lot of folks, and, and it's important to reminisce about the kind of experience that we had, and how amazing it is that you're doing what you're doing right now. That's, it's just.
Well, it's heartening. It's inspiring.
It's inspiring.
And I know it's just your job, and it's how you do it, and you're just kind of used to being excellent, but not all of us get to see that every day.
Yeah, it is very inspiring.
So what about the substance of what you teach? How are you doing history?
Right.
So when we go through, I'll focus on my U.S. history course, which for context, I teach civics first, and the students get that experience first.
Okay.
And to create continuity between the two classes, I start with, obviously, as I mentioned, the thing about thinking and all that, and then we get into, I begin, again, to kind of lay the context of where we're going and where we've, and where we're coming from. I have a lesson on just broad Western history, because we're talking about the creation of the United States and American history.
So how far back do you go?
We go back to ancient Greece. Mostly, we're not going into great detail, just to talk about a few main figures and events, and particularly Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And then we talk about ancient Rome. We talk about the Dark Ages. And I do explain the development of things like the Islamic Golden Age, and how these different ideas and kind of the Hellenistic world, and also just to think of the world not as Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, but as the Hellenized world and then all these other cultures outside of that. Mm-hmm. And how those ideas shifted and developed in different ways in different places, to then take us back to, when it comes back around to Spain and then back to Italy, when you have the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment that follows. And that sets the context for getting into American history. And we then talk about the purpose of government, since we've established the ancient Greece and the Enlightenment. We then can talk about those two things. We can then also talk about types of government, and I begin with Aristotle's 6 types of government that he laid out, mm-hmm. to give them a methodology, an example of how you conceptualize, not just here's a list of 26 different types of government, but here's how you
Aristotle's
conceptualize.
6 different types of government. There it is.
Right? Well, and he is how many people rule, and is it a proper government or is it a corrupt government? And
right.
Laying those things out. And here's his system, not just here's a list. And right. Then we talk about, as we've developed over time, what are other categories, other methods of categorization. Then we talk about American history, and we get into from colonial times through to the Revolution, the Declaration of Independence. We talk about the Constitution, and then civics ends at that point. Oh, Bill of Rights, and then it ends. Mm-hmm. And then we pick up in U.S. history from that point with having already talked about politics, we can then use it as one of the elements of history that we can focus on, but not the only one. Right. And as we go through then from 1776 through to 1929, because we kind of split up U.S. history, the latter part of it, into two parts, and I get the first part. And the when we go through, again, I've talked about civics a little bit, my Constitution, with more of the greater focus on politics. But when we get to U.S. history, they've already had this experience. They've already seen me and my method of talking about history, the way I explain it, the context that I give, the way I interrelate things and connect ideas and different concepts together. I haven't had a chance to do it this year because online schooling has compressed some things
Sure.
for the sake of time and convenience. But one of the other things that I do, I talked about bringing in prior knowledge that students, the information that they have from outside. And when we talk about types of government, before I have them choose which is the best for their purpose, I have them do a fictional government activity where they look at the government in fiction and try to classify it based off of the different systems that we discussed.
Oh, so they can say, well, I've read The Hunger Games. What is this type of government?
Exactly. They'll talk about the Hunger Games. They'll look at like a couple other popular ones are Wakanda from Black Panther. They look at lots of Disney movies, lots of monarchies. They also looked at Harry Potter and the Ministry of the Ministry of Magic in that, and like what does that fit into, and so all sorts of stuff like that. And it emphasizes on the method of, here's new information. You'll get it from a source, either myself or a book or wherever you get the information from. And I've been emphasizing as I'm explaining it through activities, whether they be worksheets, which I view as sort of notes with training wheels, is that they're not busy work. They're things that are there to give you, this is what you'd be taking notes on, but I'm going to give you a pointer about where you should be looking. And so things like that emphasize the method of thought that should be applied. And then when we get to U.S. history, the major class project that runs from start to finish in that one is the encyclopedia project, where
Yes.
I emphasize to them that since these are survey courses, I can't touch everything that is important to the subject on a broad scale,
Right.
let alone everything that will be important for your context. But rather than trying to fit those things in, and I'll bring some of those things in as it can be done and as it's relevant, but instead, it's their opportunity to look through and try to tell the story of the history of a thing that they value. So, and this often comes in the form of something like fashion, music, art,
Wow. Yeah.
sports. What are these things that are going on in parallel, in concert with the general information that's being talked about in the survey course, where these big topics of the Civil War and that industrial period at the end of the 19th century and the progressive movement and World War I, these are big things that have an effect on all manner of parts of different parts of life.
Yeah, I love how you focus on this is affecting you. That's great.
Well, and it's the encyclopedia project also emphasizes them that, I can talk about things on a really big scale,
Yeah.
but I also emphasize to them, and COVID actually gave a really good chance to do that, is that you are experiencing an event that will be in textbooks.
Yes.
But when you think about, the kinds of things I had last year, I had them write an article of what do you think the little blurb in the textbook is going to say about the pandemic? And when we went through it, I said, well, but is that your day-to-day? Is that what you experience in living life? And they said, well, no. I said, okay, so now if you want to understand this on a deep level, if you want to understand more of what's going on here, to be able to really contextualize it, you need to put it into the things that people did as a part of their lives, that they value, that they cared about, in the same way that you do. And that music, fashion, art, all that.
Wow.
Fantastic. Okay, so unless you have something else that's really, really hot, I would love to go into how on earth are these 14-year-olds reacting to what you're teaching them?
So the students in general really, really enjoy it. At first, a lot of them think it's a little bit strange. And definitely when they see me, when they walk into the classroom, when they see me standing there in a high Victorian collar.
Okay, let me just explain something to the audience here. Sean is the best. And not only is he the best, he's the best in fashion, and he makes his own frock coats, and he buys specialty shoes and top hats. And he basically dresses around maybe a little bit earlier than the turn of the 20th century. And you used to be a presenter in Greenfield Village, which is part of the Henry Ford campus, and in the Roundhouse, which is basically a garage for trains. So, but you carry on this practice of wearing period clothing, authentic or accurate period clothing in the school setting, which is fantastic.
Well, and particularly for me, it's not just that because I'm a history teacher and this would help convey some of these things. That is a part of it. But where it originates is that I just love the menswear from that era, and it's a value to me. And part of the point for to me to emphasize to the students, these things that matter and have an effect in your life, is if I'm going to tell them, be yourself, to, embrace the things that you value, seek them out, achieve them. I have to do that.
Yes.
And, not every teacher does that in some way as far as, at the school. And mine's particularly flashy and very showman-like when you walk in a top hat. But it is me. And when I walk in and, I'm asking them, why is this a chair? And I've got a top hat. These things strike the students as strange. Mm-hmm. But some of that gets their attention. And there's a certain amount of, flash and pomp to it. But
yeah,
once that becomes to more normal for them, they find that the substance underneath, once I've caught their attention with that. And the students really appreciate the fact that these things help them solve problems that they've not known how to approach or even how to think about. Mm-hmm. This thing about thinking, and as part of the epistemology thing, I emphasize a lot of introspection. Mm-hmm. And we use that not only in talking about the content in the class, but also a lot of students struggle with test taking. And also thinking about, the value, like what is the value of putting more effort into this? What am I trying to get out of it? Mm-hmm. And just like I take something like worksheets and recontextualize them as notes with training wheels, that this isn't just something you're just going to do in class. Mm-hmm. There is a practical lesson to be learned about this that can be applied when you're completely done with grade school and even college. And with test taking, the same thing applies. What is the value in this? But also, giving them the tools to think about what is going on in my thinking as I'm approaching this. What is holding me up that's causing me to trip over myself? I know the content. Why am I not able to perform on this test?
So they're asking you, what can I do when I have such test-taking anxiety going on?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And some of the students figure it out for themselves mm-hmm. using that. And other students, it's sort of a workshop, we work on it together in class. And the students have remarked, that this is something they've never experienced before, right. And they were really happy that this clicked for them. And
we have a minute. Can you describe that process?
Yeah. Working with the students on it?
Yes, working with the students on it, kind of hands-on.
So what in this case, it was actually the really great example of it was actually this year. The students in the previous trimester had, in one of the classes, they had for that My Constitution project, the essay, mm-hmm. they aced it. And that's one of the hardest things I give out because it's super abstract. It's towards the beginning. And they aced it across the board. They showed me they got it.
Wow.
And their test scores did not match that. And so I sat down with them. I'm like, okay, you guys, I know you all know this. So it's not the content. It's not that you studied wrong insofar as like you needed to figure out the information better. Is that let's take a moment to think about and I asked them how many people struggle with tests. And I should mention as a further context, one of the things I emphasize in my class is that everybody has certain skills. Everybody has differing interests, values, and skills. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to know what your limits are. In fact, that's the nature of strength and knowledge, is to know what you know and know its limitations and how the mechanism by which you can grow.
Yes.
And so the students were very open to talk about here's what I'm not terribly good at tests. I struggle with this. And I had the students list out, what is the experience? Take me through in your mind, what is the experience like? You get into class, you open up the test, and what goes on? And we talked through that. The students shared each of those things. Some of the things that came up a lot, but none of the students realized that other people had the same exact feeling. And it became a point that the students were chuckling about, realizing that, you know, they never realized that they weren't the only one that experienced this. Was something like how many of the students, as soon as the first person turned in the test, they would have this sort of internal panic moment of, I'm falling behind. And so we would talk through that, and I would explain. I was like, well, what is the grade that someone who gets all questions right and is the first person to turn in the test? What grade did they get? Like, well, an A. And I was like, well, what if you're the last person to turn the test and you got all questions right? Well, you get an A.
Yes.
You're not in a race with anybody. The only person that matters while you're taking this test is you.
Yes.
You're not in competition with anybody else. It's focus on you and what you know.
Yep.
And then the other thing is that one of the things we talked about is that some of the students mentioned that they would say sometimes little catchphrases like, slow and steady wins the race. And we talked about that. Those, and she began, the particular student that shared that said, well, I know it's a little bit cheesy. And I said, no, cheesy's good. Because the thing is, when you're stressing, when you're pulling those cards out, that little catchphrase you keep in your back pocket for when the going gets tough. The going's got tough. You're struggling. You're stressed. You are not going to be able to quote back all the logic that applies to that validated that idea. You've got the quick phrase, and that's the thing that can help bring you back down to be able to do the logic that is required to handle the information you're dealing with, to handle whatever task you're trying to accomplish. And during the test, for the first one, the one that was coming up at the time, during the test, I had the students, when we started, I said, okay, everybody opened it up, and I could see that they had all on my screen opened it up. All right, everybody, hands off the keyboards, hands off the mouse, put your hands flat on your desk. And I said, all right, now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and say, all right, we've now just burned 40 seconds. You have time. And I emphasize to them that, if you treat this like, a starting gun, bang, and you got to burst out from the starting line, it's easy to get caught up in panic, go fast, go fast, go fast.
Yep.
Know that you've got the time to get this done. Approach this. And also, I said, start with what you're strong in. Go to the stuff that you're not as confident about. Play from your strengths.
Yes.
And learn how to deal with the things you're a little bit off about. And I just gave those little affirmations at the beginning, and I reminded them once when the first person turned in the test. I said, if you have completed so many as 3 problems, you have more minutes than there are questions on this test.
Yes.
And just to remind them, you're not in competition with them. You're doing your thing.
Yes.
And the students
Fantastic.
absolutely killed it on the test. And the thing is that then for the next one, for the final exam that came after that test, I just got them started, and I told them, like, you guys know what to do. And they did it. And it's one of those things that I wanted that first experience to tell them so that they knew. And if ever they were wondering, can I be good at tests? Am I good at tests? Is this possible to me? You have that one experience. It's the proof of concept.
Yes.
You can do this. And I should mention that, as I said, I always try to tie these things to what is a skill that you can broadly apply in your life. And I said, well, how many times, like, you're taking a test, what are all the sorts of things you have to do a test? We think through you need to, you're under stress, you're given a time limit, you're trying to achieve, and you're going to be judged on how well you achieve this goal, and you're having to do it under pressure. I said, well, in your life, are you ever going to have a time limit, a deadline? Are you going to have situations where you're under stress? Are you going to have situations where you're going to be judged on the output of what you create? And they're all, well, yeah. And we thought of a couple of examples. I said, this skill set that you are mastering here, that you are beginning the journey on, and you will learn and learn and learn on this, will apply, even when you're no longer taking tests, to these situations. And know, in your mind, there's connection here, so that you can call upon this when you need it.
Well, as Emily is saying here, she's like, that is beautiful.
Well, you're making some folks jealous who are wishing their kids had better teachers.
Or that they had better teachers when they were
Or
in
that
high school.
or that we had better
totally
teachers.
jelly about that.
It's funny too because you mentioned when we talked about fashion and style, but for those who are a little older, think back to when you were in grade school, high school. Isn't it often the case that the teachers you remember most fondly were the ones who initially struck you as the most eccentric?
That's true. That is true. Individualistic and comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah.
All of that. Oh my goodness, Sean. So let's get into a few of your stories, or maybe a couple of your stories about the kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you'd asked me earlier about the effect that it had, and I shared the story of the tests, but a couple of the the other things that have happened over the years. One of the things that I do in my class is that I have a small bookshelf with a bunch of books in it, and there's a couple of them that are more kind of light-hearted reads, that are more light reads and things that are kind of just easy to chew on. And then I also have a lot of books in there that are high-level texts and are intended as a challenge to the students. College textbooks on political and moral philosophy of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. It's got all this stuff in it, and it's just a translation or a direct copy of the text. And I also have a couple novels, and amongst those novels, there's a lot of them are quite big, chunky novels, again, as a challenge to not say, I'm going to bring these things down to your level that you can handle it, because if you want to kill a student's motivation, that's the fastest way to do it. If you bring them up, no matter where their starting point is, here's a goal that you can reach.
Right.
And I expect that, not that you'll do this in my class, but in your life, you can do this. And amongst them, I had Les Miserables and Atlas Shrugged in this bookshelf. And during a test, they had finished with a test in class, and some of the students had finished earlier than others and were kind of bored sitting around waiting for something to do. And I walked around with a big stack of books, and I just, hey, take a book. And is anything across this whole thing. And of the first 4 books chosen was Atlas Shrugged and Les Miserables.
Fantastic.
And
wow.
I went up to the students afterward, and I said, well, why is it you picked these books? And they said, well, all my friends are reading them, and I wanted to know what they're about.
All my friends are reading Hugo. All my friends are reading Ayn Rand.
Everyone I know, all of my cool friends are reading Atlas Shrugged, so I thought, I want to be cool as well.
And in those cases, those are the students that I talked about at the beginning that are the ones that come in, and they generally academically do well, but they're the ones that kind of get bored in school because they've mastered the art of school. They haven't necessarily mastered everything as far as the content or their own thinking, but they've mastered the art of school.
Right.
And those challenges are things that those students thrive on, as I find all the students actually do. But we then followed that up with it was the class I took to the lunchroom. That block. And as we were walking from our discussion about those 2 novels, we went to the Les Miserables musical, Romanticism in Music. These are 14-year-olds, mind you. And then we talked about their personal favorites, having had a compositions history class. Their personal favorites were Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff. And then that turned into, I think I brought up the fact that both Rachmaninoff and Rand were buried at Valhalla, New York. It's just a fun little fact as a part of that.
There you go.
We had this whole developed conversation. And I think one of the things to emphasize there is that obviously, though I didn't provide them the compositions class, or provide them the friends that read those books and made them take an interest, it's that part of what I saw myself, and I've seen in many students since, as a really big value to them is providing the environment for them to seek those things out. And sometimes providing just a little nudge, because I think sometimes it's easy to structure things into school is formalized. It's a systematized form of learning, and to quote Mark Twain, I believe it was, I never let my education get in the way of my school, or my learning, I think it was. And I think it's easy for that to happen, no matter how on top of your educational philosophy or your lesson planning. It's easy for that to happen by mistake. And I think being able to, I'm very proud of the fact that those students saw that classroom as a place to do that, to engage in those discussions, to engage in those interests in those things.
And it says a lot about you, Sean, that you are trusting of their abilities to do these things, to challenge them, and you're also a good reader, so you understand where a lot of these kids are, and some of them are they have less of a context, some have more of a context in whatever it is, and you gauge your communication to them depending on that. As a matter of fact, that is one of the things that I found being a presenter at Greenfield Village many years ago, and I know that you did, where you were able to read people as they walk in the room. Where
I've actually still got the binder with all the facts in it that we would create the things around that was that thick. It's sitting right over there in my bookshelf.
I do too.
It actually was a really valuable experience to be able to teach, because because I love the fact that the institution itself, that the Henry Ford and the Greenfield Village and HFA as well, here's this stuff. You're knowledgeable and reasonable and responsible. Here's this, make it.
Right.
And they'll give you an example to kind of get you started, but the expectation is that you're a human being capable of reason, and you can come up with something great, innovative, and creative.
Yes. I mean, it's so good. And I just a little thought about me. I was 15. I think I was 15 going on 16. I was in French class. And I loved French, and I still do. And I decided, just on my own, I'm going to go out and get the French version and the English version of Le Petit Prince by de Saint-Exupéry, so that I can familiarize myself with the language and compare back and forth. And the thing is that no teacher gave me that. No teacher really challenged me. And boy, oh boy, I'm just very happy that at least I had access to those books. And that's great, but I mean, what you're doing is just 1,000 times that. And we're getting a lot of compliments, by the way, in the Facebook chat. But a little bit, let's just wrap up by kind of going back full circle. Oh, Linda Cordair of Cordair.com, Quint Cordair Fine Art Gallery at Cordair.com. She says, "Can I be a student again?" So, yes, I think we can all be students, but outside of the classroom at this point. But I wanted to get back to how we first met, which was kind of magical.
How did you two first meet?
Go ahead, take it away, Sean.
So this would have been just the summer after I graduated from Michigan State, and going through college, there was a lot of things that I experienced, good, bad, and otherwise. But leaving college, I felt like there were things that I knew were wrong, that I disagreed with, though I wouldn't have had the term really in my vocabulary at the time, philosophically disagree with. But the thing was that I could say, well, I disagree with that, and I disagree with that, and that's wrong, and that's dumb, and blah, 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 blah. But I didn't, and I was kind of frustrated to come to the understanding that I didn't, and I couldn't define what I saw as good, proper, and I couldn't find a really good justification for the ideas, like fundamental justification for the ideas and the values that I held. And it was on, to borrow the phrase, it's a whole system of ideas built on quicksand. It was, something, and I knew it was shaky. I knew that some things were wrong, but I couldn't define what was right. And I started working at the Greenfield Village in the roundhouse, as you mentioned. And one of the things that when we were there is that we stand there and we wait for guests to come through and to tell them the stories of the roundhouse and talk about wherever we are. And when people aren't there, what you were allowed to do, still are, is that if there's no guests in the building that you're in, you as a presenter can pull out a book and begin reading.
So it's a historical museum. You couldn't go pulling out a cell phone.
You have to be period appropriate, don't you?
Even when you weren't in historical costume,
Yes.
you were not to break the aesthetic of the building
Right.
by breaking out a cell phone. And so the very first book that I bought for the purpose of it was to kind of revisit my past, to kind of reflect on the things I'd learned and things that really inspired me. Because I used to hate history when I was in middle school, but then that sort of changed. And one of the things that changed it was seeing the ideas of the founding fathers, like, oh, people could think things like this? Like, this is interesting. I thought history was just that boring thing you did in class, even though I love the Henry Ford, but that wasn't history. History is the boring thing you did in class.
Right.
But it was things like the Thomas Paine's Common Sense that really inspired me to get into history. And so I purchased this copy right here, read through it. I was like, cool, yeah, good refresher. I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah.
And it mentioned in it that the only political pamphlet that could challenge it for influence and dominance in that realm is the Communist Manifesto, which is the next book I bought in that. And actually, you can even see the soot added to the cover here from the roundhouse.
So you went from reading Thomas Paine's Common Sense to reading Karl Marx and Engels' The Communist Manifesto.
Yes, I would show you the notations I put in the margins, but I sadly I had erased those so that I could put this in my class and not have my students read my own notes. I wanted them to think their own thoughts about it, not just mine.
The marginalia for the Communist Manifesto might not be appropriate to a family show anyway.
But after that, the thing was that there were various points in here that I could go through as both a history major in college and an econ minor in college that I could go through and go.
So how did you find out about Ayn Rand again? At this point, yeah.
I was just hungry for ideas,
Yes.
and I was reading whatever I could, watching whatever shows I could on YouTube, listening to podcasts, doing whatever I could to find information. And one of the things I came across was an interview with Yaron Brook. And the things he was explaining were like, I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Like, and I had just actually coincidentally at the same time, I'd been playing a game called BioShock. And I'd heard the name.
That's
right. Ash Ryan.
Andrew Ryan.
Oh, Andrew Ryan, right.
And and so the thing was that I had the little worm in the back of my ear saying, Atlas Shrugged. Get Atlas Shrugged. And then when I saw that interview, it solidified. I was like, this is the next book I got. I'm going to get. So I rushed out that day to a Barnes & Noble to pick up my copy here. And as I was reading through this, two things. A side note about my own story on this and then how I met you in the process is I remember one day I was listening to the book, and it's slight spoilers for anybody out there. There's a scene in a courtroom and some things happen. And I was so fired up about this. I was listening as an audiobook in my car, drove home from work, about an hour drive home, and I stayed in my car to listen to this. And the scene concludes with this moment, and I'm like, yeah, and I was so excited, I punched the roof of my car, forgetting myself and where I was. And it was at that moment that, I went into this, just with every other idea I've been reading about and learning about, I'm kind of just approaching this, kind of testing the water, seeing what I think of these ideas. But at that moment, I had this kind of whoa. And I thought, something about this just struck such an emotional chord in me. I forgot where I was, and I punched the roof of my car. I need to dedicate some serious time to understanding this.
Yes.
Something clicked, and I got to know what it was.
Yeah.
And during that process, while I'm thinking through these things, trying to understand it, I had noticed a car sitting in the parking lot, the employee parking lot at the Henry Ford, that had a couple of bumper stickers on it. Objectivist, you're not the only one. I heart Ayn Rand. And I remember...
Wait, it said objectivist, you're not the only one. And I heart Ayn Rand?
Yes, indeed. Who could that belong to, I wonder? But at the time, it was just a car in the parking lot, and I would see it every Friday. Eventually, I was hoping I'd come across the owner. But each day I would leave on Friday, and each day I would get there, I'd see the car, I would never see the owner. And on the last day I was working a Friday, I was like, I can't miss this opportunity. So I waited around for a minute, hoping to get, and nothing. I'm like, well, all right. And I grabbed a piece of paper from my car and wrote just, I'm so-and-so, I work in the Roundhouse, I'd like to talk to you about, I'm reading Atlas Shrugged, and I really like to talk about these ideas, I'm really finding them interesting. I think I gave like my email or my phone number or something, and I listed like the time that I worked on Sundays from that point forward. And I drew a little caricature of myself, handlebar mustache and all, and stuck that right in the driver's side window. And then a little bit later on, I'm working in the Roundhouse, and I see this very colorful hat turn the corner, and then I see the person it's attached to. And I saw not only Amy, but then Robert coming behind, and from there, I got acquainted with the two of you and attended Glow. And
so good. So good.
And it was a wonderful experience.
Well, let me tell you just a little bit about, I had lost that note somehow. It was such a tragedy. I'm like, I don't know where it is. Oh my God. I lost the note. So I went ahead and I talked with some of the people who worked at the Roundhouse and the trains and those folks, those presenters in the village. And I'm like, there's a guy, his name is Sean. Do you know him? And they're like, well, I think that he works at the Roundhouse on Sundays. And I'm like, okay. So
we've got to stop by on a Sunday, see if we can figure out who this is.
The first Sunday we went, I don't think you were there, but the second Sunday.
Yeah, it took a couple trips.
There you were, and you had basically put a little cartoon head of yourself and what you looked like with a handlebar mustache. And I'm like, that's the guy.
They found me.
We found you. We found Robert.
We should mention that we've, as part of Glow, of Great Lakes Objectivists, and our monthly get-togethers, we've done Objectivist Pictionary before, and Sean is almost invariably the best artist of the group.
Yes.
So it's small wonder that
However,
picture on that note was actually helpful.
However, my skills may actually be in contention at this point, since our good friend Holly inspired me to
start artin
with this bunny eating a rose. And by the way, bunnies can eat roses. I don't know if any
bunnies do eat roses. I don't know if they eat the stems. They probably could handle the thorns, but they
could do it.
But we used to give our bunny rose petals.
Bunnies can eat bark off of twigs. So
yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was such a great memory, and Joe writes such a great story. Yeah, and Rebecca. Oh, Rebecca's on live. She often catches us after the fact. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
Rebecca's the best, and
yes.
Thank you. You know what for. Oh my gosh. Yes, we are so over time, but I really don't want to stop.
So I put out
great
there,
stories.
if anybody has any questions, now is the time to ask them.
Speak now or forever hold your peace. Until we have Sean back again, which we will definitely do.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could easily fill another 5 minutes with stories.
Yes.
Might I include one more brief story while the
Sure.
questions are coming in?
Yeah.
So one of the things I actually had in the years that I've worked at the academy, I've had multiple siblings in my class, and in fact, in one of those cases, this last year, I had a younger brother of another student I had, and their parents tell me that they frequent words to be heard around the dinner table in heated debate and discussion are Locke, Rousseau, purpose of government, natural rights, general will, collectivism, individualism, and they are quite passionate about this.
And despite that, their little brother or sister is signing up for your class.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
That's outstanding.
So it's just amazing, Sean. Honestly, the work that you do at Henry Ford Academy, which is now where they are now enrolling students. it's just fantastic. It's just fantastic. And so I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. You know what? Keep up the good work. You've got another, I don't know if you're going hybrid at this point or if you're always online at this point or, with things changing in the pandemic, but.
You're going hybrid, actually.
Okay. Very good. Very good. So
there will be some on-site teaching.
Good. You'll be able to see these precocious young kids whose cool friends read Atlas Shrugged and Les Miserables.
Well, outstanding. Sean, we can't thank you enough for being on the show. You have provided us, as promised, amusement, information, and inspiration. I don't mean to overplay the idea that some of us have a disheartening idea of what goes on in the schools these days, and I know some places are better and some are worse than others. Our friend John Hett, the lead singer of my band,
yes, my band,
of Amy's band, of our band, is also a public school teacher.
Yes.
And he teaches in an even more challenging environment. I know he was in Inkster schools. I forget where he's at now.
Right, it was Garden City,
Garden City?
Yeah.
Garden City schools. And it's interesting because the way he talks about it, I think he might run into substantially more challenges than you do. I know he works with a lot of special education kids, but he has similarly inspiring and surprising stories to tell. So for anybody out there who thinks, well, the public schools, it's all over.
And
there's
right.
wonderful things happening out there.
And our friend Kira, she is a Spanish teacher, I believe, in a
That's right.
Livonia school. And so she's very familiar with objectivism, and she talks about Atlas Shrugged, and whenever it's appropriate, of course, whenever it's topical. So for those of you who don't know, there are a lot of objectivist high school teachers out there.
Yeah, and I don't mean to overplay that, but maybe it's just me. I know it's not just me. I know it's a lot of people I know who think that way. I had posted this week real quick. It's amazing to me that even though I was surrounded by idiots in grade school and college, and I was often one of the idiots myself, somehow we grew up, and enough of us were reasonable enough and capable enough and virtuous enough that we've replaced the previous generation in business, in science, in entertainment, in leadership. And the civilized world has not only been maintained, but mankind has progressed and improved by nearly every objective measure, and in many ways by orders of magnitude. Seriously, most of us were dimwits, dopes, and not that great morally either. And the world, looking at mortality and lifespan, or poverty and prosperity, or violence and safety, or literacy and access to information and opportunity, and yes, technology and leisure and entertainment, and nearly everything else continues to progress. It boggles the mind. That's what I wrote earlier this week. It boggles the mind. But after talking to you and thinking about my conversations with John and with Kira, I know the teachers of the world are bringing up that next generation and keeping the wheels of the world turning. And you are in our debt, and you have our admiration.
Yes. Yes.
And with that said, we are way, way over time. So unless there was something in the chat that needs to be said, I'm just going to mention.
Yeah, we're good, I think.
I don't have a new Post-it note for the week. Your homework for last week is the same as your homework for this week then. If you have a morning routine, check it, change it, fire it up, make it better. If you don't have one, adopt one. That's what I'm doing. My Post-it note last week said, a good mistake is a terrible thing to waste. Make sure you're learning from your mistakes. Re-listen to that episode if you don't recall why that was the Post-it note of the week. As I mentioned last week, we now have a Clubhouse show on Radio Ragnar. That means if you've got an Apple device, and they're working on the Android version, but it ain't out yet, you can find me at 7 o'clock. Yes, it was 8 last week, but they're now on British Summer Time, 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, or Greenwich Village Time, as opposed to Greenwich Mean Time. Again, show called Life on Earth, Clubhouse, 7 o'clock. Find that information on Facebook. I don't know why I have American Red Cross here. I donated blood this week. I don't even remember why I was going to mention that. Oh, because we also got vaccinated. Amy and I received our first Moderna shot.
We're
So
superhuman
congratulations to us. And your reminders. Post-it note of the week, already done. Why do I keep double repeating the post-it note of the week? I need to change my recap notes here. Reminders. Show notes will be online within 10 minutes after the end of the episode. This week, the show notes are almost exclusively information about HFA, the Henry Ford Academy, and the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation, and Greenfield Village, where Amy works and Sean works. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/Robert Nasir. If you want to make a one-time contribution to the show, paypal.me/Robert Nasir. I've now put links to all of that, including all of the show's past episodes and everything else. One simple place to go, robertnasir.com. It's the kind of website that looks like it was made in the late 1990s, but everything you want is there, robertnasir.com.
Yes.
And thank you for joining us. We give double thanks, extra thanks, super thanks to Sean Albert. Thank you for being here. I expected this to be great fun, and I was right. This was great fun. And we will do it again. You're going to see, folks, you've talked about it. Now we're doing it. We've got Chris Land slated to come on soon. His new book, Why Funny is Funny. This will be the definitive work on why humor works the way it does. Chris Land will be on the show soon. That book comes out. When do you release a book on humor?
April 1st.
April 1st. So you'll be able to look for Chris Land's Why Funny is Funny. We will have him on the show as well. We're definitely going to have Sean back. We've got a short list of names of folks we want on the show. I won't announce them yet because they haven't said yes yet, but I'm sure that they will. It's going to be a good year both for this show and for interviews. So thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Yes. Thank you so much, guys.
As always, we wish
great.
you,
Thank
and I
you,
mean
Sean.
you, I mean the person listening out there, you know who I'm talking to. You feel it in your gut. Oh my God, he's talking to me, and I am talking to you. We wish you success. We wish you flourishing. We wish you the opportunity to learn from people as wise as Mr. Sean Albert. Oh my gosh, if we'd only all had that kind of education. And as always, this week, as much as every week, and maybe a little bit extra because Easter is right around the corner, so bunnies and candy and hearts and things,